Hi, everyone, and welcome to this month's episode of HR Benecast, your source for expert commentary and insights on current health benefits related news and strategies. This is your host, Mike Stahl. It's really hard to believe we're coming up on the end of the year already. Another record year in new pharmacy spend for our coalition not only means growth in our purchasing power, but growth for our team as well. In 2022, we added 14 new team members across various functional areas. Today, we're joined by one of those team members, Matt Harman, who serves as our Vice President of Clinical Solutions. Matt and his team monitor, evaluate, and improve upon Employers Health's PBM group purchasing program, really with the goal to ultimately help clients achieve better clinical outcomes, minimal disruption, and overall lower costs. Matt also started the managed care pharmacy residency at Employers Health, which has served as a pipeline for the growth of the clinical team. He also manages and executes the organization's flu immunization program, which administers flu vaccines to thousands of individuals annually at their workplaces. Matt serves on a number of local boards and national advisory committees as well. Welcome back, Matt, and I figure we'll just get right into it. Your team recently got back from the Academy of Managed Care Pharmacy, so AMCP. It's Nexus conference where I'm sure presentations and conversations centered around the latest in managed care pharmacy. So tell us a little bit about what the hot topics were and what employers should be watching for.
Sure thing. First, thank you for having me, Mike. Honored to be here, and for all the loyal listeners of the HR Benecast. And it's my second time. I think the first time had 6 million views, and some say it was the best podcast of all time.
Some say,
yeah. So glad to get the return invite, and happy to provide some insight today to our employers listening. So. Yeah, AMCP was a great time having the clinical team there, meeting with different representatives from health plans and pharma, and really getting a lot of great insights we can share with our employers. A lot of hot topics, centering around, the legislative issues. Really, it's amazing how much legislation, both at the state and federal level, have impacted and got it kind of entrenched within pharmacy compared to when I started here over 9 years ago. So from, initiatives to ban copay maximizers and accumulators to, how's the Inflation Reduction Act going to impact certain things. So I know, some employers are concerned about that act and how it might impact things indirectly. Still remains to be seen. I think there's some optimism that, pharma does things wrong because there's a fear that they may lose profits on the government side. How will they impact employers? From all that I talk to, they're going to make sure that they are treating things fairly. We'll see how that plays out. Yeah, I mentioned copay programs. That was, I feel like, a few different sessions, since there's concerns from pharma. How is that going to impact their revenue? But I think they understand that it's better to have patients on their drugs than not on them at all. So I do see them lasting a little bit longer in the future than maybe initially thought, unless state legislative initiatives stop them altogether. There's also big interest in just public health in general. There's a great guest speaker talking about how, particularly for employers, vaccination rates have gone down, and and not just because of COVID vaccines, but just universal childhood vaccinations. And I think those kids and preteens eventually become employees. So I think trying to reinforce the importance of immunization. And I know there has been just certain mistrust in the industry because of the changing, all that has changed from a science perspective as we learn more about COVID. But the way I think about it, have a loved one that has cancer, we're not going to give them the treatment from 60 years ago. We know that science progresses hopefully towards the truth and most effective products. So that's kind of the way it goes. And we, as we've learned more, the guidelines and everything are updated in that regard. And guidelines have definitely been updated. That's another big piece that we saw. Just I think clients, we've experienced just growth in specialty spend. A lot of that's because guidelines are now putting more of these biologic products at the forefront of either first or second line and trying to eliminate some of the step therapies, because the evidence is just there to better disease control and better outcomes. Now, unfortunately, it comes at a more expensive price, and I'm sure we'll talk a little later about different strategies to control those. So those are some of the things that we kind of gathered from the AMCP conference.
Very good. Sounds like it was a full slate of good topics. Anything else in the pharmacy benefit market, maybe in general, that your team has its eye on?
Well, I think the elephant in the room is biosimilars. 2023 has been a year that I feel like we've talked about for the last decade with the pending launch of Humira and how will that play out. I think less talked about Stelara. That's the number 2 drug in the employer's health book of business, and that potentially could have biosimilars in 2024 or 25 or so, and then you're going to have kind of a cascade of other biosimilars throughout this decade. So how will that play out? And so we have good data on the medical benefit, but it's actually a little easier to get biosimilars on the medical side of things. But the pharmacy will be a little trickier with just patients are more familiar from an injection side. You're getting that injectable pen, so you know what it is versus a brand new version. When you think about the medical benefit biosimilar, it's just a different bag they're hanging from an infusion standpoint. So sometimes the patient doesn't even aware that they're getting a biosimilar. So from a patient disruption standpoint, is it the same needle side? Are you having the same pain from the injection just because of the constituents that make up that drug? So, the launches of Humira, the first one in January, and then we'll have quite a few in July and throughout the rest of 2023. Now that we have the formularies that have been released for the 2023, none are preferring biosimilars, which makes sense since there's not one out in the marketplace. But I don't expect any to really make a move in late 23 either, just because of how rebate guarantees and everything are set out. My hope is that we will have some for 2024, at least options for employers. If you want to be a biosimilar friendly formulary, maybe take a hit on your specialty rebates, you can go that option and not. And then for those that want to keep collecting rebates and don't want to, maybe have potential disruption to members, then you can go that route as well. And so we'll kind of be pushing for that for our clients. I would say from a disruption standpoint, there's been over, hundreds of studies from switching biosimilars to the reference product and back and forth all over the world. And none have found any clinical meaningful difference for patients. So I wouldn't, I know there's always concern of, disruption standpoint and ensuring patients continue to receive their products without, gaps in care. But I'm confident that the biosimilars, that when they eventually have access to them, will provide the same level of care and hopefully at a lower cost to our clients and their plan participants.
Yeah, I think one of the things we talked about this week at a advisory board I was at was, how consultants, and it goes for us too as a coalition, but how consultants need to adjust their models to take into consideration, biosimilars that may have a lower list price. And we know that, at the end of the day, it really is a big math problem. And so, we know that the higher rebated products are typically higher list price. So if you have a biosimilar that's a lower list price, say 20% lower in list price, but has a smaller rebate, how do you factor in the lower list price? The models today don't necessarily do that. And so I think that's a big change that advisors and consultants and us as a coalition helping to structure a contract have to make sure that our analytics are ready to account for
100%.
that.
And that's what we're focused on. So I would say, Mike, you sound fantastic. Is that the mic that you have there? I'm so jealous of what you have versus my little setup here. So I promise when I listen to the podcast, I hope I won't hate my voice as much as possible. I think the highest level of self-love is appreciating your own voice. And so I'm getting better at that, but it's hard. So I'll try to I need to invest in a better mic so I can appreciate my own voice more.
Well, I will tell you that the microphone doesn't help me appreciate my own voice. It actually might draw out some of the other
No, there's no
imperfections of
imperfections.
it. So I mentioned in my intro, I mentioned the growth of our team, and for the clinical team in particular, I remember interviewing Matt. So when we hired him, he was a team of one. So up to 8 now. Exciting times, and the question becomes, what does that mean for our
Absolutely,
clients?
yes. I don't know if the loyal listeners know that Mike was my very first boss at Employers Health. So that's a fun trivia fact. So yeah, very, very lucky that we have 8 members on the team now. That means that, have a less stressed Matt on our hands. I mean, just to be honest, I've had 2 panic attacks in my life. One was that back about 5 years ago when before we had anybody else, it was just me. And realizing there's so much could be done here. We have so many employers and wanting to be at every meeting and wanting to respond to every email in less than 5 minutes. But it got hard because we keep growing. And so I'm very lucky that we've invested in our clinical team. We have all varying strengths, but they're all great personalities and hard workers, and all feel very lucky to be here, and just like I do as well. So I know that what it means for our clients is that you should have more clinical representation in your meetings. Even if we're not at a meeting, there's I'll say a very, very high likelihood that we've reviewed your data and providing maybe talking points to your client solutions team member or business development executive. That we're trying to get more involved in implementations. It's hard with since the sales team keeps selling like wildfire. So congrats to you, Mike, on another record sales year. It's very fun to be a part of the growth, and we're trying to be more involved and give that unique perspectives that sometimes our PBM partners, their pharmacists can say things that are I can't say certain things that we can, just commenting on the general marketplace factors and understanding the complete picture. So I think we're getting more hands-on data, hopefully providing more content from getting more communication out there from with written and get out there for presentations, and want to be more accessible to both our clients and their consultants and brokers.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I always found in working with different pharmacists all across the country was, depending on where you went to pharmacy school, really had an impact on how you saw certain things. And so I think it's really neat just to see how our team has, continued to develop with the diversity from both diversity of individuals that are part of the team, but also where they've gone to school. And so, definitely some different strengths among all of the team members that are on the clinical pharmacy
Thank you. Yeah, I mean,
team.
diversity is a big focus of mine and the team to continue to provide opportunities for individuals and just different strengths. I mean, we do those strengths finder, and one of mine is arranging and finding individualization of the talents and organizing them to the best capabilities. So I think we're starting to do that. I mean, every pharmacist is trained at the clinical advisor level, but now as they get past that residency, we're seeing some take on more data roles, more take on more presentation type roles, development of different tools, and it's exciting to see where we can go from here.
So when you're looking at data, you mentioned that. What are you guys? What's your team? I should say. What is your team specifically looking for when you go through a self-insured plan's data?
Sure. So first, how's the trend looking? Positive, negative, super. If it's growing considerably or dropping considerably, what are the driving factors there? Is it one claimant, a super high cost specialty claimant, or is this an overall trend that can be explained for a variety of reasons? Like I mentioned earlier, the guidelines changing in some of the autoimmune spaces are really driving some of the growth in that area, or is this low value spend that can be managed from a utilization standpoint? So those are some of the things, and how do those rankings from a therapeutic class or top drug perspective compare to the book of business and employer self as well as that PBM's book of business. So sometimes there's a formulary change that really is drives something, or these different brand over generic strategies sometimes will make data look a little funny. And so being able to provide that insight and understanding is important. But I think we're always looking at what's major trend drivers, and I'm trying to put that together with what we know from our marketplace insights.
Yeah, and that is key, right? Again, back to the advisory board I was just at this week. One of the complaints I heard was, too often, account managers from PBMs in particular will come in. They have a stack of reports, and it literally is just reading numbers
Brutal.
off of a page. And so I think one of the big things that our teams, whether it's client solutions, but particularly pharmacy, because you have the context of, why are these drugs being used in the first place? I mean, being able to tell the story and put context behind, here's why this is happening, here's why patients are taking these medications, and here's why it's important to you as the employer. I mean, that's the differentiator of working with a team like ours versus just working with the PBM alone.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we try to give that insight to, all right, you have this new specialty patient. This is super, it seems concerning from a spend side of things, but think about what this drug is doing, both for that patient, that quality of life, and just from a caregiver, their whole family. These conditions can have an impact on not just that patient, but the individuals surrounding them, and as well as from the medical cost side of things, avoiding hospitalizations. And so that's what these drugs are for. Sometimes pharmacy trend is not bad. It's, if you're blocking hospitalizations and, multiple day stays, or, a variety of different things that can really drive trend that sometimes we don't focus on, those medical benefit, trend growth. So that's why we try to provide that insight and learn why this drug is priced the way it is. Why is it, gaining in terms of moving up the guidelines and prescribing patterns.
So we talked about looking at data from an individual plan level. Also, I know we look at data across our entire book of business, which, as you mentioned, we continue to grow. It continues to become a larger and larger data set. We've developed, your team has developed several custom clinical strategies that a lot of our clients have put into place to try to get rid of some of the wasteful spending in pharmacy plans. So I wonder if you could talk through a little bit about the process, how you go about identifying some of these strategies, but also a little bit about maybe what you've seen from those groups that have put them in place.
Sure. So yeah, the way I think about our creating custom strategies, I really fall into three buckets. And so it's creating our own custom strategies that completely unique to the coalition. And then two would be enhancing the PBM's criteria, looking and making sure, looking at prior authorization rates and different, how that might, different criteria plays in from a documentation versus attestation side of things. And then also understanding the trend data, understand the data that you mentioned in our own book of business, as well as from a pipeline side of things. So when you're talking about custom strategies, we think about, there's a lot in the generic space. So I know if our clients have seen the various flavors of high cost generics 3.0. Well, I have exciting news, breaking news on the pod that high cost generics 4.0 is coming out in 2023. So very exciting stuff. Another flavor of that would be our expensive dosage forms. Think about those that have tablets versus capsules that maybe one's 5 times more expensive than the other, but the same clinical difference. And we've tried to think about the patient in mind here and minimize disruption as much as possible, because we understand how important that is to our clients. And we've customized the messaging at the point of sale at the pharmacy to recommend the alternative that the pharmacist could call that physician, or potentially have that alternative on the shelf and fill it right away. So that way that patient doesn't leave the pharmacy and still get their care right away. So that's one way. And then in terms of our own criteria that maybe is similar to the PBMs, but sometimes the PBM criteria is just checking for diagnosis and allows the doctor to just check a box. Well, think about some, there's a lot of medications, particularly in the dermatological space, that there's generic alternatives that just work as fine. So we'll incorporate a step therapy into there, maybe require some documentation to ensure efficacy for a variety of different things. So because some of the PBM criteria may have a 80 plus, 90% plus approval rate. So it's something we evaluate on an annual basis, at least from our various PBM partners to see what approval rates are too high. Maybe we need to tweak a little more or just turn off altogether if it doesn't make sense. Why are you subjecting clients to or patients to, PAs if it's ultimately going to be approved anyways? And then, as you mentioned, looking through the pipeline, encouraging PBMs to come up with criteria and have it in place. And sometimes we feel very strongly, hey, can we make this an opt-out approach where only if a client doesn't want it, then they say, we don't want to have this step therapy on these migraine medications, then they can turn that off rather than having them sign off on a form to adopt it. So those are some of the ways we think about from a custom clinical edits. Looking forward to get more into the specialty space as things go along.
I love the breaking news on the podcast. Hopefully we have a good sound effect that we can put in there. Right. Breaking news.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what you want people to tune in to learn things like that, right?
That's right. We appreciate it. I know at our PBM conference, we had Rob O'Brien talk about gene therapies and what impact they may have on employers. Certainly, we know that some are out there. We know some are close. Anything new that you all have seen in terms of employers combating, the risk associated with the price tag on some of these really novel, really exciting therapies?
Sure. At first, just to set the stage, right now we are at 4 true gene therapies approved. There's different ways you can classify gene therapies, but the real true gene therapies, we have 4. And one was in August and one was in September. So we've doubled just in the last few months. And then I would think over the next year or two, we're going to potentially triple. And a lot of those are going to be in the hemophilia space. So if you want me, we can talk a little bit from a pipeline perspective. But from a solution perspective, I think it is challenging. There's different either PBM or health plan programs like these PMPM fees to hopefully minimize the risk. Now, I just haven't seen the data, like how are those playing out, and I know that, and I think there are finally options. I believe CVS even has one where you can pay out over time if you have a gene therapy. So I think coming about, but it's really challenging from a warranty perspective, particularly in the employer space, where what happens if you pay for that gene therapy and that patient leaves 2 years down the road. When one of the groundbreaking gene therapies we're going to have in the next year or so, the hemophilia space, fantastic data. I mean, you're talking 98% reduction in factor usage. Works really well, but it works about 90% of the time. So what happens when you pay $3 million for that? For 10% of the population doesn't work. How does that play out from a warranty perspective, or how does it play out if it didn't fully work half as good? So I think there's still some challenges that we need to work out. Employers may be able to stand one gene therapy, but once you get a couple, that those budgets are going to be tighter, harder to manage. So I know those stop loss has been a big piece of it. So, I think there's some new programs out there, but we haven't seen them fully, kind of been utilized. I don't know about Mike if you have, but there's just been kind of the talk of here's what the programs are, but in terms of enrollment and patient kind of satisfaction, client satisfaction, reflections on those programs so far, I haven't really seen just yet.
Yeah, I haven't necessarily seen any major results. I think, as we've done some quick math on some of them, they don't seem to make a lot of sense as it relates to managing that risk. I think also you have to have a really big risk pool in order to effectively spread the cost out at a reasonable amount. And maybe that's something that, from a policy perspective, I know even large employers, through some of the big surveys we've seen or that I've seen out in the marketplace, have shown some interest in some sort of government risk pool. And so maybe that's something that from a public policy perspective, we can turn our attention to as more and more of these become more commonplace.
Absolutely. I know some of the manufacturers will offer if the drug doesn't work, then they haven't done it for every single one, even within the same manufacturer. So I think it's interesting to see they'll kind of put their money where their mouth is for some, but not others, which makes me a little concerned. It's confusing. So, and we only have 4.
You hit on one new pipeline drug. Anything else from a pipeline perspective that you wanted to cover?
Sure. I'd say the growth in atopic dermatitis is something employers need to focus on. I think they may be familiar with the drug. Dupixent was really the first specialty product approved for that. Now we've had a few. So Adbry, Rinvoq probably is the most heavily utilized, and Cibinco. And we want to make sure that those drugs, that there's appropriate documentation of the level of atopic dermatitis, since there's quite a few products that can be used as kind of a step therapy piece of things, and ensuring that those drugs are being effective. So there's a lot more to come on that atopic dermatitis side. It's been a big focus. Orphan drugs are probably the largest piece from the specialty pipeline, almost 50%, which generally used to be cancer was 50%, but cancer is more than 20-30% of the pipeline going forward. So there's been a huge focus on the orphan drug side, which are much more tougher to manage. Because, you're lacking therapeutic alternatives. Many of these patients don't have any therapies out there currently, and so they're just waiting for approval. And so how will that play out? So also, I guess from the specialty side, we're going to see more in the multiple sclerosis. I think it's interesting that a lot of oral products, when the existing oral products, Tecfidera is already generic. Gilenya has been back and forth, patent litigation, but that should be generic, launching here any minute now, and Aubagio as well in the next year. So I think having sound step therapy and control on the multiple sclerosis side will be important. But yeah, lots to come in the especially pipeline. In terms of diabetes, I guess it's worth mentioning. I guess a few years away from those products going, the ones that are kind of in the top spin going generic. It's tougher since a lot of them are injectable products, but who knows, by the time those go generic, there'll probably be new ones that are out and at the top of spin. The one thing I can think of is Mounjaro, that product that was approved this year for type 2 diabetes with outstanding data as well for diabetes as well as obesity. So I expect that to be one of the top 5 drugs in the world once it's all said and done. So we'll see how it plays out from a formulary side of things. It sounds like Eli Lilly's not playing the rebate games as PBMs would like compared to some others. So interesting to see. So that's kind of led to less adoption from a formulary side of things.
Mm-hmm.
Don't penalize manufacturers for being good, right? Come on.
That's right. That is right. All right. Well, I can tell already this is going to be an instant classic.
We're going to pass 6 million listens on this one.
I think we might get there.
All right.
So I think some would say this might be the new best podcast. So appreciate you sharing anything that we missed. I feel like we went top to bottom in terms of the list of topics we wanted to cover, but anything that we missed.
Oh, yeah, thank you all for listening. Thanks for Mike for having me. If there are any things that I mentioned and you have questions about, feel free to reach out. If you have my email, connect on LinkedIn. Happy to answer anything that you like further clarification on. So hope to be back in the future.
And make sure you read the articles in EH Connect and on the blog.
Absolutely.
I know your team takes a lot of time and pride in putting together good information for those as well.
We try.
Yeah. It's appreciated. All right. Thank you, Matt.
All right. Thank you all. Take care.
Before we go, I want to thank our sponsors for helping to not only make this podcast possible, but for supporting us and providing great employee benefits related content throughout the year. Thanks to annual supporters CVS Health, OptumRx, and Elixir, and our executive sponsors Delta Dental, Pear Therapeutics, Pfizer, and USRX Care. Visit employershealthco.com/supporters for a full list of sponsors. If you haven't already, be sure to save the date for our 2023 Pharmacy Benefit Conference that'll be held March 8th in Columbus, Ohio, where you'll hear from members of our clinical team and other experts in pharmacy benefits. Visit employershealthco.com/events to see all of our upcoming employee benefits events, and be sure to subscribe to HR Benecast to be notified when the latest episode is out. There's always something new at Employers Health, so follow us on our social media, LinkedIn and Twitter to stay up to date. That's it for this month's episode. Thanks again to Matt and the entire Employers Health clinical team for their knowledge and dedication to our clients. And thank you for taking the time to listen and for your continued membership, participation, and interest in Employers Health. Be well, and we'll see you soon.